slightly behind. Wayne doesn't need any introduction. I actually think I was going to give him a nickname today, which was that he's the godfather of automation, right? Or even test toolsmiths. And he's going to show you, building on what Gareth said, really, around this kind of MBT modeling kind of thing. He's going to build on that and say, well, how do we create something that's open, something that, you know, we can all use, and again, something that's, you know, is a tool which is going to going to be able to solve out so many of your problems. So without any further ado, I'm going to queue up Wayne's session from Curiosity.
Hello, Testing Festival. My name is Wayne Ariola, and it's absolutely my pleasure to join you today, this afternoon, at the Testing Festival. I'm joining you from Los Angeles, California, or for the folks in the UK, Los Angeles. I don't know how that happened, but it happens. And coming out of my COVID cave to present to you the Open Testing Platform. So for the folks in the audience, if you haven't heard about the Open Testing Platform promotes this idea of inform, act, automate. And the reason why we have come up with this pattern of inform, act, automate is because if you really look at what delays software testing or what delays our practice of actually doing a very difficult task of testing software, is it's usually that we lack the information about change. It's that we are not informed about late changes that could happen or changes that we were unaware of that impacts the testing cycle. And if we were alerted to these kinds of changes, we could take action. So the inform, act, automate pattern is all about connectivity. It's about observing data throughout the dev test infrastructure in order for organizations to take advantage of information and make it actionable. And that's what I'm going to present to you today with the Open Testing Platform. But the idea of the Open Testing Platform truly came from really some observations we saw out in the environment. We saw that there were software testing teams that had a real binary approach to testing. Either that they were testing what they could, or there were teams out there, which was usually led by a global systems integrator that tested everything, okay? And between the two, it essentially has created turmoil, meaning that in the test everything approach, usually we found that the regression test suite or the automated testing test suite was so bloated that when it ran, it created more downstream pain that what the team could actually, could consume. Essentially, it creates more confusion. There was a lack of context associated with the tests that were running, a lack of prioritization associated with the results. And what happened here was in the test everything approach, it creates a lot of confusion. So the alternative to this were organizations that did not necessarily have a great degree of automation, and they used an approach which was test what we can. And test what we can is actually not a bad approach. It uses usually the intuitive reflexes of the team to decide what needs to be tested, and it's usually executed manually. But test what we can actually has a very focused approach, and this focused approach usually comes out with much more pointed results, meaning that there's not a lot of noise in the information. But this binary approach to software testing never really focused on one question, which was, how can I reduce the risk of my release? It was basically testing for testing's sake. And if you're on either ends of the spectrum, it was not optimal. The second thing we began to notice was that there was a really highly siloed tools approach, team by team. So one team might have a preference for using Selenium, another team might have its own framework, another team might prefer Cypress. And by the way, this is okay. Software testing teams should have the affinity to choose whatever best fits their project. And maybe it's a talent question where you want to make sure you have the best fit for the talent or the resources that are using or that belong to the team. Or maybe it's an architectural fit where you might choose something that is more, for example, like a Playwright or a React, or something that is more affinity, has more affinity to the architecture or the actual language that you're using today. And this is okay. But with the siloed tool approach, we have to start to understand that the open source, free, and proprietary software testing tools today are quite good. They actually offer a lot of very distinct value, but they become nodes in the process. And what I mean by this is they are sensors that deliver information back to some decision node that allows us to move our process or the cadence of our process forward faster. Today, I do believe that we have baked too much business logic into the testing tool itself, basically making it immalleable. So this idea is that we need to separate the logic from the tool in order to actually have the ability to keep the cadence and prioritize our activities for software testing. So in summary, in the siloed tool approach scenario is one, it's a good thing. Open source tools are very productive today. Open source tools can actually assist teams to actually move things along much, much faster. Yet, what we need to do is we need to separate the highly connected idea of the business logic being embedded in the tool itself. And this is why we have come to this conclusion that there needs to be an abstraction, something that assists us to actually take advantage of the tooling as a node. So if we look at software testing today and the software automation and the software testing lifecycle, what you'll notice is, even though we talk about automation a lot, what you'll notice is that software testing is really a patchwork of manual tasks that happens in the minutia that happens, or the interstitial tasks that happen in order for testing to work, okay? So if you look across the life cycle in terms of requirements analysis, test planning, test case development, test automation, test data automation, provisioning, test prioritization, so on, what you'll find is the level of automation varies from task to task. But as a whole, we haven't necessarily automated the task of software testing. One thing I want to point out with this particular graph, which I believe is extraordinarily interesting, is number one, if you look at this idea of test case development, this is really where we talk about the idea of automation the most, test case development. If you look at the surrounding scenarios, and let's take environment provisioning as one, that is something that has become much, much more automated over the years. But if you look at the idea of test case development versus this test execution, which is only at 16%, what you're finding is many teams, even though have automation, are still running that automation manually. And we can improve upon this distinctly. So the idea of the open testing platform is that we bring a lot of these components together and allow the organization to truly have advanced automation. And in fact, we feel that data-driven automation, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, can remove up to 70% of the waste, which is delays or manual tasks, in the software testing lifecycle. This is incredibly important. This means that those small interstitial tasks that we have to perform in order for the automation to work, we could actually automate. Test data and test data management, test data automation is a fantastic example of this. No one has really gotten it right yet. And in order for us to really optimize testing, you got to get the data correct. This is just one of the components. Obviously, there's environment provisioning, there is design, there's requirements analysis. All of this should be working in concert for your test and your test automation capabilities. And when we decided, hey, from a Curiosity Software perspective, that we were going to go after this idea of the open testing platform, we said, okay, it's got to be a very tight understanding of what's going on. And this is our definition. An open testing platform provides a digital twin, I will discuss that, of your critical business transactions, okay? It is a collaboration hub that connects disparate tools and allows teams to keep pace with change. Okay, let's unpack this idea because I think it's compelling. I think it's what's next from the software testing perspective. A digital twin is something that a team of humans can collaborate against, but it's also an infrastructure that provides a receptor or a way for machine interactions or observations from around the environment to interact with the model. And this is critical. This means that humans have a way to inject new things that are not predictable, but machines also have a way to interact with the model to engage in things like prioritization, the definition of risk, identification of change, information about changing dependencies, and information that allows an organization to keep pace with the very complex array of circumstances that are impacting the model. Now, the digital twin should reflect the most critical business transactions within the environment itself. This gives the team a common understanding of what's important. It also gives the team a launching pad to actually design into or produce tests that surround the core model. But it always relies and gives you the idea that there is connectivity and dependencies between them. And if those dependencies change, then you are alerted. The core of this collaboration and machine interaction via the digital twin is what allows us to take this idea of inform, act, and automate to the next level. So inform basically gives the individual who is responsible for a particular point of the process information about change. And it gives them information about change only when it's necessary. So the idea of inform in the inform, act, automate sequence is that the right information is delivered to the right person only when it's pertinent. We cannot start or continue, I should say, relying on dashboards to provide us information. These are passive. What we need is we need information to land and inform our humans to take the action as required. The second thing is act. And this is action against the digital twin. So any kind of pattern that we can basically identify or promote within the software testing lifecycle should have three components to it. One, the inform pattern, which alerts people to the change or to the into the information that's required. Two is the act pattern. And the act pattern collapses this idea of interpreting change and produces an action within the tool that you're using. So for example, a idea that there's a change in dependency would actually produce an act notification within the model that you're working or the digital twin. This gives the worker or the tester the heads up that something needs to change. It doesn't need to be interpreted by a dashboard. It doesn't need to be discussed in a meeting. It basically lands in the workspace that is required to make the change. And finally, automate. Automate's important because it skips a lot of steps, meaning that if we see patterns that happen over and over and over again, we don't have to take the chance to just recommended action. We can actually create an automated task. This has a lot to do with prioritization, the identification of risk, and how we're actually moving through the infrastructure itself. So let's take another look at this, okay? So let's say you're curating data for testing, okay? And you have various systems in your dev test infrastructure, such as an APM system, version control, web analytics, an agile test management system, or even a defect management system. There is really critical information in these systems. And not only is there critical information in these systems, the correlation between the data we observe within these systems is even more powerful, right? So meaning that if we wanted to take the APM or the application performance monitoring solution and understand that there was a dependency change and reflect that against really what's in the queue for agile test management, or understand where that is from a version control perspective with the code, we would want to correlate those actions. And those would produce much, much, much more specific requests or much, much more specific notifications of information. But we need something to act against. We need this digital twin that sits in the middle. We need this idea that the information that's being correlated or observed from the surrounding dev test infrastructure needs to act against something. And this is why the digital twin sits in the middle. Now, what we could do with the digital twin in the middle is we can inject our requirements or our new user stories into the model. And we can make the manual changes that are reflected by requests from the business or requests from how we are prioritizing our work through epics and stories and whatnot. And we can apply those to the model. And the model then can understand, given those changes, what information is pertinent or what am I missing or required. This creates your gap analysis associated with artifacts. It creates your change workload associated with the tests that need to be created. It creates your priorities in terms of what needs to be addressed within the environment. And then finally, what this infrastructure does do from a digital twin perspective is it auto-generates your scripts for whatever kind of framework you're using. So if it's Selenium, if it's Cypress, it's whatever, Appium, or over 100 different tools, the open testing platform understands the requirements, understands the impacts of change, ingests the information or observations from production, and then assists you to create tests that matter. And essentially what we're doing is we're driving this pattern. This pattern is, like I had mentioned before, inform, act, automate. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this as we in the last end of the presentation. But I believe that this kind of infrastructure allows us to eliminate a lot of the hunting expeditions or the archaeology that happens as we do our job day to day. So if you look at an open testing platform, what it does, it's a connectivity environment, right? It takes information from the observed data points from around our dev test infrastructure and allows us to inform teams around the right information on the right time. It then allows us to map against those critical transactions that are really driving our business. So it ties those observations to the impact of business. It can then draw in things like test data and marry it together and auto-generate scripts. But the most important thing about the open testing platform, it's connectivity. It's this idea of having an open framework that allows you to connect data, tools, and workflow. It's your path to the anti-vendor lock scenario, but it's also your path to freedom when it comes to actually leveraging and integrating data throughout your dev test infrastructure, giving the tester information to be extraordinarily productive at any point in the process. So what challenges would an open testing platform solve? Well, first of all, the whole goal of the open testing platform is to be the conduit to identify change. And this can be anything. It can be notifications of change of code, notifications of impacted tests, notifications of changing test scope, notification of changing data, understanding environment changes that could impact the testing activity, understanding whether requirements or user stories are in line with what is the expected in the infrastructure itself or for the release cycle itself, understanding whether feature flags are being worked on that are unexpected. It also focuses on risk. It can actually give you data-driven priorities in real time, allowing you to alter what tests need to actually be constructed and maintained and executed in order to meet the objective of the particular sprint or the particular release cycle. It could show different user impacts, different persona impacts. So if there's a changing persona in how people are actually using the system, that should be notified automatically and not have to be discovered later on down the line. It can highlight risky components, risky code changes, late code changes, changes in scope, and changes in the dependent systems. When you look at execution, this is really critical because this is, I think, where we really get burned in terms of actually executing tests. We need to understand the application dependencies, whether they're internal or external APIs. Those notifications of changes in those dependencies are critical for us to actually executing what we need to execute day in and day out with our tests. Environment access, container changes. This is really config changes within the environment itself. If somebody comes in, explodes your environment, you're going to want to know about it. When you usually find out about it is when you begin to start your testing activity, and that's way too late. And I think one of the most important things about the open testing platform is we're also going to be able to give you information about the quality of tests, whether you have duplicates, whether you have test bloat, whether you have low coverage, over testing, poor tests, false positives, or false negative warnings. This is an infrastructure that allows you to bring that information together in order to make better decisions about the actual quality of your test itself. If I really had to say what's the major benefit of an open testing platform, well, since it's focused on really what to test, the value is not only does it focus you on what you need to do, but also the value of it is it focuses in on what you don't need to do. Today, I think we're plagued with this idea of over testing, and we just don't know how much downstream work it creates. So the open testing platform hones in on what really is required, giving you the ability to actually focus in on the work that's required and necessary to continue what you want to do within your sprint or to meet the conditions of the actual release itself. And I can't imagine even more here, folks, that when you look across your dev test infrastructure, there's a lot of great data out there, and correlating that data to other pieces of information within your organization really gives you some tremendous insight in terms of what you should be alerted to. But you got to remember that it needs to be time boxed. Meaning that if something isn't going to impact the current sprint, it's probably noise. So we got to understand not only what the impact of the changing information is and be able to correlate that across different application or different kinds of data types, but we also got to do it in a time boxed or time horizon manner, which allows us to prioritize how we're going to receive information and how we're going to act upon that information. Okay. So with all that, let me give you a few examples. Okay. So, when you talk about the open testing platform, you got to really look at this idea that we have an infrastructure which allows you to drive change and to react to change faster. So here is one pattern we call an inform pattern. This is a change warning in GitHub. And in fact, the idea is like this. So you have a GitHub commit. The GitHub commit is then picked up by the open testing platform. We basically use our information that we have to understand whether it is correlated or not. Does it impact the current sprint? So we do a time horizon check. Then what we do is we separate this commit to say, is it a brand new commit, or does it actually is it a new commit associated with an existing requirement? With that, we'll actually then provide the analysis or the cross analysis with the other dependent systems and gather the data together, which would actually then shoot it out to whatever your communication preference is. Maybe it's Slack. And within Slack, what we're going to do is we're going to give the tester all the information required, do all the data archaeology for you to say, here's the commit, here's the requirement, here's the developer, here's the last developer who touched it, here's the last tester who touched it, and here are the tests that are actually associated with this particular commit, or here are the gaps associated with this commit. This is timely information delivered to the desktop of the individual in order for us to take action. Now, here's an ACT user story. And this one is predicated on doing a requirements analysis. So a new user story lands in Jira. And essentially what we do is we kick off an automated requirement analysis. And the automated requirement analysis then gives us a pass or a notification for refine, which pushes the requirement back to Jira to say it's not accepted. A passed user requirement would then use natural language processing and actually inject all the fields or components into the model in order for us to advance the construction of testing. So here is a great idea of ACT in which a requirement or a user story is triggered in Jira, and what lands in the actual tester's workspace is a notification that a test needs to be created. But the good part about it is all the components that need to be orchestrated within that test or tied to that new user story land in your workspace. So it doesn't have to be recreated from scratch. This is absolutely critical. The final thing is an automate pattern, and this is change-based testing. So the scenario goes something like this. There's a commit to GitHub. We do the analysis on whether that it actually impacts the current sprint. We actually run through the analysis associated with the other requirements and user stories that are in flight, as well as the impact to the critical transactions which are in flight. And then we reset priorities. Within the model or within the digital twin, the impacted tests are then highlighted, and that notification is sent to the individual in their current, whatever medium they wish in terms of their notification. This is absolutely critical because it's great real-time information. It is understanding what are the impacts of change immediately. And then it also, with the fact that it gives you the notification within the digital twin of the impacted tests, gives you all that information within the central workspace. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but let me summarize. Within our scenario of the digital twin, within our scenario of the open testing platform, we give you an infrastructure not only for human collaboration, but also for machine injection or machine interaction. This allows you to use real-time prioritization, real-time risk mitigation data to actually prioritize the work. It also promotes this idea of inform, act, automate. And the inform, act, automate pattern, I think, is the most critical breakthrough of the open testing platform. It gives the tester the information they need when they need it. It gives you notifications within your workspace of the actions that need to be taken. And then finally, it gives you the option to automate repetitive tasks that basically occur throughout the whole life cycle itself. With that, Testing Festival, thank you very much for having me. Again, my name is Wayne Ariola. If you would like a copy of this presentation, please don't hesitate to email me or hit me on LinkedIn, and I don't mind doing it. And I think we're going to have a Q&A after this, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Let me welcome Wayne onto the stage. I know we're here. And look, he's also made it all the way from did you say Los Angeles? Is that how we say it?
It's the French interpretation, of course, yes.
It must be, of course it is. How is beautiful LA?
You know, it's a little overcast. It's only going to be 70 degrees today, so I might have to wear pants.
Well, let's not make you stand up during this event. But again, pants has a different translation over here, so we'll keep that one going. We also use the word kegs, but I don't think that translates over correctly to the US, does it? That's beer in kegs, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, it is brilliant to have you, Wayne. I know we've had some very interesting conversations in the past, and what I really like about the tool session at the moment is we're all suddenly starting to talk the same language: digital twins, nodes, data archaeology. It's literally coming down the industry. You're shaping the industry, which is why you've earned the title of the Godfather as far as of the tooling industry. So we've got loads of questions. The first one is, instead of a digital twin, what about just using passive active observation monitors against production to proactively discover and resolve issues? From Gordon.
It's just digital twin is just 2 words. Instead of using passive active observability monitors against production to proactively discover and resolve issues, just a little bit more convenient to me with this idea of digital twin. But Gordon, I think what you've really honed in on here is the fact that no longer can we be working in a passive model. What we do need is active monitorings or active nodes that are sitting throughout both production and pre-production environments in order to influence what we do, when we need to do it, and how we need to do it. So, to your point, Gordon, you're spot on. Why do we call it the digital twin? Look, if you can come up with a better name, I'm all up for it. I think we're in a really amazing part of the evolution of software testing at this particular point in time. So we're trying to find things that fit. And I like digital twin, but and it's only 2 words. So I'm going to stick with it. Gordon, you have my email address. If you come up with something better, let me know.
Well, maybe Gordon can actually just stick it in Wikipedia, right? And we'll have digital twin and the full, British American dictionary term, right?
In Wikipedia.
Absolutely. So next question, Wayne. The open test platform seems to be useful for app that is deployed for some length of time. But could I deploy this locally so that before I commit my code?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's more important in that perspective, because what you're actually doing is you're creating or you're abstracting the logic of what's important to the business. And that conversation about creating or understanding what is happening or what should be happening is critical before you even start to code. Now, we're not always in the case where we're in a greenfield environment. We're obviously working in a very complex environment with many moving parts. And with this, quite honestly, having a fabric in which we are painting and understanding the dependencies, understanding the complexity of the application and the environment that we are working within, I think is absolutely critical before you do anything. So yes, I totally agree with you, and you should be doing this before you commit your code. And in fact, you know what? You are doing this before you commit your code. You're just not probably doing it in a way which is reusable or something that has interconnectivity with the rest of the environment. This is creating and taking this idea and expanding.
Well, Gordon just seems to have all the questions. I don't know if this is just generally going to be a one-on-one. You should maybe invite him in to host it, right?
You need to buy him a beer by now, because these are great questions.
They're all stonkers. So, does this user story analysis conflict with, BDD, TDD, ATDD, the Dan North, Elizabeth Hendricks kind of stuff, or do you think it just builds on it?
I think it builds on it. No matter what, the English language has a ton of words associated with it. Not everybody is a native English speaker. The number of synonyms associated with each English word is pretty intense. And the fact of the matter is that requirements analysis can absolutely cut through that confusion, give you clarity, as well as automate some of the downstream processes. BDD, ATDD, or any other DD that you're doing, I believe is just a method in which you're organizing yourself. Now we're going to apply a little bit more of automation around that to assist you to be much more clear. As well as, by the way, not only just clarity, but giving you more data, right? At the end of the day, guys, our gut feel has proven to be wrong multiple times. The more data that we can wrap around some of the observations we have, whether it's the written word, whether it's code, whether it's a test, whether it's gaps in tests, whether it's changing conditions of dependencies, is only going to help us hone in on doing what's right faster. More of this human in the loop, but augmented by automated analysis.
I love it, and I must admit, one of the conversations I had with Tarek and Jason, when I know we use the word final frontier quite a lot but what they were saying is that one of the most breakthroughs they've had is with this when they've been training against the language of which people use within these tools. So if think of something like ALM, and you think about how you write and structure steps, that actually if you can train it to be able to actually read and understand and interpret, and we talk about things like knowledge graphs and stuff, but get that structure, it can then in theory write the tests. Yes. And I think that's the thing, is that there's so much data, and at the moment it's not really looked at. We either just create a whole stack of tests or they become obsolete. We don't take those learnings and do anything with it. So I love the observe sense. I think it's just a fantastic kind of way of rethinking the entire model a bit like with Paul's kind of model for testing is, you know, you're retraining your mind to what have I got access to, and what I should be feeds, right?
Well, talk about inform, act, automate. I mean, I would love to know if I was driving that BMW that somebody else has hijacked it and now is turning off the engine as I'm on the N4, right? Yeah, I would love to understand you know, more connectivity. And by the way, this inform, act, automate pattern is the critical steps. We all understand the patterns which drive change, and I think some of us intuitively look at this stuff, right, and understand it. But as our jobs shift, as the roles shifts, as the applications shift, as change happens around us, it becomes you know, unfathomable to actually bring this thing together and understand the nuances associated with these patterns, right? So machines can help us with this. And I know there's a lot of fear that the machine is taking over. No, it's making us better, right? Because the human still needs to understand what the impact of that and guide that training of the information, right? And then once we do that, we understand what the real critical next steps are. I mean, still today, you know, I talk to a lot of organizations, and I think the primary question that has begun to emerge is, you know, are we testing the right thing? What's really important? No two releases have the same level.
It's 9 o'clock.
And within those two releases or comparative sprints or time horizons, how do I know that I'm actually doing what's optimal, and can I do it better? And it's all about making the human more productive in the loop, and taking this data and making sure that the informed pattern is working no matter what is the first step.
No, I love it. I absolutely love it. And we've got time for another good question. So what measures do people need to do when shifting to this open test platform? So training, you know, upskilling, what advice would you have to people?
So the first advice I would have is, number one, understand what data is available to you. As I speak to many of the software testers out there, SDETs out there, or people who are interacting throughout the DevTough lifecycle around the quality of the artifact or the deliverable, I'm usually quite shocked about the fact that they're not aware of what kind of data they do have access to in the surrounding environment. And this is critical, right? So, you know, the APM system has just some amazingly rich information that you should be looking at, right? Your web analytics can tell you a lot about persona, but all those are usually kind of discrete steps that someone has to take intuitively by themselves in order to incorporate back into your cycle. So how do we do that more automatically is, first we have to understand what's there, okay? The second thing is, the idea of using a digital twin also parlays a lot about understanding what is really critical from a transaction and end-to-end transaction perspective. So this is understanding your business. So the next thing is, you know, the breadth. I do believe in our rush to shift left, we've actually granularized a lot of the testing activity, and we've lost sight on the broader end-to-end impact of change. And knowing that what the real true business impact of those changes are is absolutely critical. And so the second step here, I would say, first one, get to know your data and get to know what's available to you. Second step, get to know the process, right? Understand what are those major critical transactions that you believe are the most critical. Paint them or model them within the digital twin, and then, you know, start seeing how the environment is acting against what you believe are the critical dependencies. You're going to notice some patterns that you didn't necessarily were aware of before.
I love it. Well, let's try and squeeze one in, because we're going to bring the break on a bit earlier, because I know you're going to be jumping back in and you're going to be. I want to ask you one more question before we do, because we did have this conversation, I think it was in Star East or something, maybe 5 years ago, and we kind of said everything's a node, and then we kind of went off and really started understanding what that meant. And I think Kumar's kind of asking, you know, well, what is a node, and what kind of node should I be looking at, right?
Yes. So, by the way, for those of you who are not present at that conference in which Jonathan and I were having a whiteboarding session on a piece of paper at a bar, the outcome of this was that we need to be collecting information and looking at testing and kind of the idea of a testing tool as a node. And that node collects information at the appropriate point in time, and also is dependent upon optimizing the logic that needs to be run in the correct time horizon. So I think the conversation around nodes really is around two really distinct components. One, that node should be optimized for the architecture and the skill level of the individual on the team. And two, that the logic should be variable. We can't just keep jamming everything through this node and expect to get answers that are more appropriate for the business within the time horizon we're looking at. We need to optimize the what, right? The what needs to be tested. And if you kind of get to that point in your mind that you understand that I can vary the nodes and collect information versus the changing code, versus the changing application, versus the changing UI, versus the changing dependency, versus the changing API, and orchestrate those in a manner which optimizes the logic for the time horizon and the release, you're going to be in a much better spot, because the alternative is test everything. And the test everything thing turns out to be, we're going to fix 10% of what we found, and the other stuff we just know is noise. We just can't keep continuing that way. We need to be much, much more intelligent in the way we're attacking this thing. So if we could be intelligent at the node, which is the endpoint that is collecting the information at the appropriate point in time, I believe we're going to be much better off in the future.
No, I absolutely love it, and what I love, I know you guys are helping contribute to the new ISO standard for model-based testing. So we're trying to define this language together as we go along. But the idea with subflows and really what Test Modeler brings out to the entire game-changing industry is that you can understand those different levels. Whether it is an API, whether it is a database, a piece of data transfer, or an ETL, what you're modeling, and understanding the flow. And the thing is, as we'll see in a second with the break plays, part of it is it simplifies that, and everyone in the business all agree exactly what you said by what is it, what's in there, what are they discovering. And I think through that, it suddenly opens up a new place that this can start anywhere. The application doesn't need to exist, and you can define the model. You can have a new app, you can have an existing app, you can, the flexibility is huge. The app doesn't need to have been built. It could be a whole stack of shims and stubs, and you can test and you can build this, and you're not waiting till the last minute for a UI or waiting for an endpoint to be created. You can model your system and discover problems before it's even the code's being put, I'm going to say, to pen to paper, but let's say punch card to VAX machine.
Twin fits this description perfectly, right? And a digital twin does not have to be a discrete device or a discrete endpoint. It can be an amalgamation of expected actions, right? So it makes total sense.
Well, it's game changing as always, Wayne. Every time I speak to you, whether it's 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you've got a great new idea. This open test platform is going to revolutionize the industry, right? You guys are doing some amazing stuff in the test data space, which is is industry leading, and again, you're leading the way for some of this modeling as well.
Yeah. I think Hugh Price is going to have some time to talk to you about that tomorrow too.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Wayne. Enjoy the sunshine, overcastness, and we'll see you later on.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Wayne, for that. Now, ahead, as I mentioned, of our schedule, we're going to break now. Don't worry, you've not fell asleep and you've not missed Iran's session. But we've got 2 live sessions after the go, and Wayne, as he finds the disconnect button, will know Wilson Marr from the early days. He is kind of, he's going to be kind of transforming us on his security landscape, so security testing, which I think, is an area where hopefully you're going to get a lot of value. So that session's live. We got a session from Kate live, but we will be getting Iran's session. And the good thing is I'm coordinating with him on Slack, so I'm going to try and get him there so we can interact more and we can spend more time. So first of all, thanks to Perfecto and everyone else. You need to go and check out Testcraft if you've not seen Testcraft. It's game changing. But I'm going to play the break. It's the time for you to get into the gather, start chatting to people. start entering yourself for some of those prizes. And I will see you in what is 22 minutes time. But if you're in the booth and you're having a good conversation, don't worry. You'll be able to catch up and with the sessions. So thanks again. Thanks to Wayne from Curiosity, and let's go into the break.